Thank you. Thanks, ladies. Wonderful to see you all, though for the first time. And thanks to the audience. So we're not going to raise our hands. Who in the audience would love to start a company and make it a success? And if so, please stand up. Come on, don't be shy. If you've done it once and want to do it again, please, let's see. You never know who's going to help you later. 2 years from now, 3 years from now. All right, look at the people around you and make a note. Okay, let's get started. Dharti, I'm going to start with you.
Okay.
Tell us a little bit about how you went about achieving product market fit and proving it to your market, and some tips on that.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. Since the focus is on FineWinesnMore, which is my third startup, all three startups bootstrapped. The first two were more in the service space, and because I achieved a fair amount of success, I thought I could do well with the third one as well, which was in the product space, and a completely unknown product, wines, and that too in a country which is heavily regulated, more so than all over the world, in India. I decided in 2006 to start a wine imports company in India. After having one business in the US and one in India, fairly successful, decided to start this not knowing anything about wine other than how to drink it and enjoy it. So obviously, you know, the product itself was a big challenge. Like any bootstrapped startup, you have limited resources and your priorities are all over the place because it's a brand new product, brand new market, so too many variables. One big help that I ran into was having my background in direct marketing. So before going into anything, I decided to do a little test in the market, in the Indian market. We had a small consumer base, so we sent out a questionnaire figuring out people's tastes in wine drinking. And that actually helped us tremendously because not only India is a very price-sensitive market, but people like only particular type of wines. And so it wasn't about my personal taste, which was very different when it came to wine drinking, but finding out what Indians were drinking, and not just Indians in Mumbai, but Indians in Delhi, Indians in Chennai, in Bangalore, everywhere was different. So that was another very interesting result of the survey. But having done that, you know, it really helped us a lot. Gear up in the right way, suppliers, pricing, go-to-market strategies, and we can elaborate a little more as we move.
Awesome. Fantastic. Can't wait to taste those wines. Okay, I have to tell a little story here. I was practicing this with my CEO, and who's been on Moderator for many, many panels, and he almost picked this question for Ritu. So, having read all your profiles, which was very elite, by the way, I was very inspired. So, Ritu, share a little bit about your first customer journey, how you went about securing it and retaining that customer.
Yeah, so my company is Zoom. We are the leading platform for providing safe rides for children. In my case, the journey is actually a combination of two things. First, identifying a problem that I was deeply passionate about and actually facing in my real life. I have 2 children, and when my younger one started going to school, it became really hard to find somebody trustworthy and reliable to have them picked up from school and take them to activities. And looking around, there were everybody pretty much in the office going through the same pain. There are 63 million families in US going through the same pain, and 41% of the women say that they find very hard to actually do well in career because of this reason. So first thing for me was to identify something that I was deeply passionate about. And in the second thing, what happened was I was at eBay. I had expertise in marketplaces. Having decided that this was something I'm going to solve not just for myself but for everybody, I decided to leave eBay and go to Stanford Business School. And that's where I actually went into the class of Steve Blank, who used to say, get out of the building. Like, nothing gets solved, but just because you have a pain point and you think the problem is certain way, you have to get out of the building, talk to customers, follow their journey and see what do they feel about it. And interestingly, when did that and interviewed hundreds of parents and walked through their journey, I realized that the trust was the number one thing which would prevent or make people actually use a service. And that's how I designed the product market fit, by going through every step of the way to see what would bring trust to the parents, to help them use the service, because the pain is there 2 times a day or more for 13, 14 years of their lives. And so the pain is almost like anything that you use as a painkiller. So market is big. The key thing for me was designing a solution around that trust that the parents would use every day. So for me, finding a product market fit was essentially a combination of these 2 things, and then executing day in and day out till we get to the point where our goal is pretty much every parent uses our service every day.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And a little extension to that is the personal bond that you develop with your customers. I'll tell you my story. I worked for a growth company, a connected car startup. We launched with one of the major carriers in the US, and system down first day, system down second day, system down third day. And we thought we were going to be fired, and that's the end of our company. And guess what? 18 months from now, we got through all those problems and we are still here. They're our biggest advocate. I think the personal bond that many of us had was really helpful there. Would any of you like to share some of your personal bond that you had with your customers where it has helped retain them? Open to anybody on the panel.
Sure, I'll go. So my company, Lumo Bodytech, we create wearable sensors that integrate very easily into your clothing to track things like your posture, your running gait, your walking gait. In fact, I'm wearing one of our products. It's this tiny little square magnet. It looks like a little lapel pin, and when you slouch, it vibrates to remind you to straighten up. Yeah, sure. It's funny when I am on panels and I tell people what I do, it's like everybody grows by 1 or 2 inches because they like sit up. I see the whole audience move. And so how we really cultivated customer intimacy early on was, especially in our early days when we were prototyping, we took a very rough iterative approach where we tried so many different form factors, right? So what we realized, the problem we were initially setting to solve was back pain. Back pain and posture go hand in hand. But the hard part about posture is awareness, right? It's remembering, because we're so consumed by our devices that, we create this slouched position. And so we start to ask, okay, what can we do to help people be more aware of their posture so that they can self-correct and develop good muscle memory over time? And so we took this very iterative approach where we created very kludgy prototypes, sensors like in a adhesive form factor, belt form factor, things that attach to your underwear. Like, we tried so many crazy things. And what we would do is we would give them to our customers or our would-be customers and follow them in the course of their day and see what was it like, how did they interact with the product, did it really solve their problem, what were improvements. And so by taking this human-centered design approach, we learned so much by really, what Ritu was saying, like actually getting out of our own shoes and getting into theirs to try to understand what is it like. And with the insights that we got, we iterated over and over again. And an example of that is the first product that we went to market with. It was a Kickstarter product. It was a belt. It was this product. It's called Lumo Back. And we thought it was a fantastic product. We had like 2,000, Kickstarters in 1 month. Like, we thought, wow, we've hit it big. What we realized was the form factor is actually not a mass consumer play. It was very difficult because it's so big, and so for the very more casual customer, who wasn't as committed to putting this on every day, it was just too hard. And so we went back to the drawing board and we started iterating on what are other form factors that are more invisible, that are easier to use. And so that's how we evolved to the second form factor, the magnetic lapel pin. But if we weren't following our customers and listening to them and really seeing how they interacted with the product and what were their pain points, I don't think we would have been able to make that kind of change.
Awesome. And how did you deal with revenue projections and struggles associated with it?
Wow. What startup ever makes their revenue projections, right?
Exactly. That's why I call it a struggle.
You know, it's just persistence and staying with it and making sure that everybody understands the end game, the goal that you're working towards, whether it's your teammates or your investors, like helping them to see, okay, you know, we're not hitting the mark with the, you know, huge hockey stick that we thought, you know, no, we're not going to become a $100 million company in 3 years, but like helping to see the progress that you are making and to see the traction and the improvements and the customer knowledge, the IP that you're building, and I think as long as people understand your vision and you bring them along to your vision, they will come along.
Fantastic. Yeah, you already talked about quite a few pivots that you've done. Indu, I'm sure you've done a lot of pivots in your life, and how did you ensure they were at the right time, and what prompted them?
Yeah, good question. I think 3 important points that I always look for is I'm an enterprise person, so I'm not a consumer. I don't sell my products to consumers. It has to be to the enterprises or even, probably B2B2C. But, so I know how to sell to the enterprises. So always know who your customer is. Whom are you selling to? You have to be very clear when you come up with your product. Who are you selling to? And unit economics is, how much are they going to pay? Where is the wallet? Do they have the authority to make a decision? And coming up with unit economics is very important. Even though you don't get the whole picture, at least you need to be working towards it, because we can always come up with a product, but if it's going to take you, 6-month sales cycle with 2 people in your sales, but you're only going to make $25,000 in the annual ARR or even the lifetime, then you can't have a sustaining business. So you kind of have to really understand what are you doing. The third is solving real problem. I mean, you kind of, this is where you probably heard it many times, vitamins versus painkiller, but I always go, how much of a friction are you removing for the customer? You can't be, yes, you can make their life easier, but that's still a vitamin. You kind of have to have a real value prop. I mean, if it's going to be cost cutting, which is always hard to come up with it because it's a hard sell to do cost cutting. But if you can have cost cutting with some kind of incentive and revenues, it's probably you'll get someone's attention. So really knowing who is your customer. When I say who, I'm not talking about organization. I'm saying within the organization. Are you selling it to the engineering head? Are you selling it to the finance? If you're going to sell into engineering, you better know that they're going to put you through ringers, doing due diligence. And if you're going to go through finance, they will be very clear on what ROI you're going to give. So you will be able to get your product and your pitch based on whom you're selling to and what is the real value proposition, and unit economics is very, very important. And that's where you start pivoting, because if it doesn't make any sense for you to be having a product, selling it, I've had situations when we pivoted in 2008 because actually twice in Cirrus when I ran it for 14 years. One is we had a downturn with high tech, so we needed to go to semiconductor. And semiconductor, I realized they're all PhDs and they'll put you through ringer. It's like, to get $250,000, you're spending so much of your time and energy. But then I realized that if you templatize it, then it becomes easier, and then trust building. So you kind of have to do the unit economics early on, because otherwise you just don't have a business. If it can scale, it's great, but if it can't, then, I advise a lot of startups and I invest. And how many times I see this, how are you going to have a sustaining business if you're going to get $15,000 a year from a customer where you have actually spent, 6-month sales cycle. Anyway, so that's kind of how I would look at, when you're pivoting, if it makes sense to actually have a business. Even though you're solving a problem, it might not really be a sustaining business.
Perfect. And Monisha, in a product like yours, choosing the right team must have been a very important step in achieving the early harmony and alignment, because you don't want a set of founders and early team just constantly fighting with each other. Any pearls of wisdom on that?
Yes, one of the things I feel most proud of is the team that we've built. The 3 co-founders, we've stuck with it for the last 7 years. And we have a very strong team because we built in a culture of feedback early on. We are very honest with each other. We go through an exercise called the good, bad, and the ugly about how we're feeling about things. And because we've established this culture early on of feedback and transparency, what that does is it squashes conflicts before they have the chance to, grow big, right? It allows, it squashes misunderstandings. So much of conflict, I think, is just misunderstanding. And by, clearing the air early on versus allowing, these things to fester is really big. And so that just takes a lot of the interpersonal issues out of the way so that you can focus on the business and on growth. So that's something that I advise all startups, founders to think about, is how can they build in a culture of feedback in the founding team as well as beyond.
Did you have to make any tough decisions early on?
We did, absolutely. In fact, a lot of our first hires were the wrong hires. They were people who were incredibly impressive and very accomplished, but that doesn't necessarily make them right for that stage of the company. So, we had this person who was very accomplished marketer in consumer packaged goods. And just when it came to working with a very small budget and, thinking outside of the box and doing more than just branding, it was a struggle. And, it wasn't, and then my regret is we waited too long, and I think that was a disservice to her too, because she knew that, she wasn't performing. And I think she would have been better, in a place that really leveraged her skill set at the stage that she was able to serve. And so I think along the way, realizing that when you get the inkling that maybe somebody's not a good fit, addressing that early on. I've never heard somebody that, say, oh, I let somebody go too soon. You usually hear, you know what, I let somebody go too late, like I should have done it sooner.
And just to add, I always look at it as, I think it's known in the industry as always fix, move, or shoot. There's only 3 things. So you're constantly evaluating, and you never, that's part of the, founder, CEO's job, is constantly evaluating. Can you fix the problem? Can you move them? If you have an extremely introvert who got your first 2 customers, who now wants to say, scale sales, might not be their core competency. So you might want to move, in a different role, and might be they'll be successful, or shoot. Like constantly, being aware of it, that it'll happen, and you kind of have to make this decision.
Ritu, Dharti, anything to add there?
Yeah, so I actually quite agree with both Indu and Monisha that there are different people who are fit for different stages of the company. Like in the early stages, when seed stage, you really need scrappy people who can actually bring things together and do multiple roles at the same time. In the Series A, you need different people, and Series B, when you're in a growth phase, you need very different people who can scale you up to like 10, 20, $30 million revenue. So the key thing is to identify those people, right people for the right stage, and your hope is that people will grow with you for the desired scale for the next stage of the company, or they would weed out, just like Monisha was saying. And I completely agree with you that it's a disservice to the other person if you keep them too long, because they might be fit somewhere else at the other stage of the company.
It's a very uncomfortable thing, but earlier the better.
Yeah.
And Monisha, you're absolutely right. I've never had a situation where, oh my God, I wish I'd done this later. Never has happened.
For us, because it was a nascent market, and there was a lot of enthusiasm in the market because it was a new lifestyle trend. So it was very positive. So we trained a lot of people. So we paid for their education, and that was one way of kind of retaining them, and they grew with the company. So that was a big positive for us.
Awesome. Let's talk about the go-to-market strategy. I'll start here. For us, a very enticing, very attractive opportunity was to selling directly to a consumer, and we decided not to go that route because it's very hard, and I work for a connected car company which doesn't do hardware. So we chose not to go that route and go through the carriers, and which is very hard. Working with the telco carriers is like going to the dentist every single day. My apologies to any dentists out there. As much as I love them, don't enjoy my dentist visits. So we decided to go through the carriers, which was very painful. It still is painful, but we're live with 7 carriers, and that was a strategy that paid off. So I feel that the audience could benefit from hearing from all of you on go-to-market strategies, do's and don'ts, and what has really worked for you.
To start?
So in our case, the first obvious go-to-market, as I described to you, problem would look like we market to parents. And that's actually an end consumer in all cases for us as children and parents. But very early on, we realized that the distribution or the majority of commute for the children happen to schools. And schools have budgets and they have problems. So interestingly, our go-to-market evolved just like you were saying, instead of marketing directly to parents as much, marketing to schools. So majority of our revenue comes from schools directly paying us instead of parents paying us. And that way we solve the problem of the community and market our solution to schools. So one of the things for go-to-market to see is what is your cost of acquisition? Is it higher than actually the lifetime of the customer? Is the engagement there for the customer? Are you able to keep the customers for long enough time to be able to have the lifetime value that you expect from them? What is the churn rate? And how do you find a sticky use case in the solution itself so that customers stay with you for the longer time? And that's how we evolved our go-to-market, by finding what is that sticky use case where the parents would stay for the longest time, and who would pay for the service, who would subsidize for the service. And we basically developed an ecosystem around to have a very sustainable model to scale a solution.
For us, because we were in the B2C space, we had to find, again, regulated, so advertising was not allowed. So we had to find alternative ways of getting to our end consumer. What worked really well for us was affinity marketing. So we had tie-ups with companies like American Express, because that's where the consumer spend was coming from as well. So we started doing events with them, wine tastings, dinners, and things like that, bringing in the consumers, and then, like you said, drawing lifetime value from those consumers. And that has really helped us, and it was an organic growth, one satisfied customer bringing more and more. And so we started then doing it in other cities, and that's worked really well for us.
Yeah, that's been a really interesting challenge for us and journey for learning. We set up our company, Lumo Bodytech, we had a vision of it being a platform play from day one. At the end of the day, the real secret sauce is all about our motion science platform, our ability to understand not only what you're doing, are you sitting, standing, walking, running, laying down, but how are you doing those things? How are you sitting, standing, walking, running, and laying down? And so that begged the question of, okay, do we want to go direct to consumer first? We could go the medical path, we could go the corporate wellness path, we could go the sports path. And it was really hard at first to know, okay, where do we want to start? Which vertical do we want to focus on? Because each of those are also very different business models. And so we decided to go direct to consumer first, because when we started in 2011, we didn't think that the other channels were as mature. They were just starting to dabble in wearables and digital health. I mean, in fact, in 2011, the phrase wearables and IoT didn't even exist yet. Mm-hmm. Like there was this quantified self, movement. And so, it's perceived as people who were these kind of real, wackos who like only navel gazing, like, measure everything about themselves. Like that was how it was seen, the space that we played in. And so we didn't even have a term for what we were doing. And therefore we knew that enterprise markets would be tougher to break into. And so that's why we started with direct to consumer. And what that allowed us to do by being direct to consumer, it allowed us to build with a high, very, very high bar. Because when you're asking people to pay for products out of their own pocket, there's just, an even higher level of, quality that you have to pass. And so that really helped us to learn how to create really good product experiences. But also what it allowed us to do was collect data on customers. And so we've sold, over a few 100,000 units at this point, and so we've collected millions of hours of motion science data that feeds into our motion science platform, making it more and more robust. And so because of that investment that we made in the early years on direct-to-consumer, that's given us a really strong platform that now we are focusing on some of the other channels. It's giving us a really good brand and validation point to stand on, to be able to say, look, our platform has already, launched multiple products. We have proven that we can deliver, and now, as we're talking to partners in the medical channel and the corporate wellness channel, they see that we're a company that can deliver.
Indu, anything to add there?
Yeah, I think it's, you need to be doing market validation from the time you have an idea. I mean, that's who's paying for your product is very, very important. So you won't find out with what I mentioned, the three things, without talking to the customers. So I think that's a way that you're going to find out where the product market fit is. And just as a story, I've sold to customers. This was 2001. To Quantum Corporation when I launched Cirrus Corporation. I was still in my dining room. We went through the hoops of doing the RFI and all of those things, but I got $250,000 and we're still in my dining room. And, it's like, so there is, if you're really solving a problem, there is market validation that you can get, but also, can you sustain it? Is that an early customer, and would you get many more? So you kind of have to keep asking that question. And secondly, I just launched with my high school son last year a company called Space Basic with another CEO, and this was focused on India market. And I never thought that I would even get revenue in India, right? This was just like, hey, let's go see if India market is, what we realized was a few things we did market validation with is that who's going to pay for it? And we said it's a dormitory solution. So it's used by dormitories, Indian hostels as we call it, to work with. It's an app that's used by students to communicate with the management. And we realized that they're getting their fee from the students, and if we can increase it by $2 to $3 per year per student, it's not a big pass-through. It's a pass-through for the student, and it's the line item called convenience fee. Nobody even blinks an eye. And we did. First year we got about 10,000 students, and we got over $20,000. We still didn't have a product, completely working product, right? We had like a beta version. So there is ways to do the validation, and I would encourage to do the validation. It doesn't have to be completely done. It has to be enough that you're getting early feedback, whether this is the market you want to focus on, is there paying customer, is the unit economics work. So I'm a big believer in do it sooner than later.
And how did you leverage your board in all of this? And what role did they play in giving you the right input, etc.?
Depends on which stage you're in. When you're early stage, you're kind of, you have a bunch of advisors, not really big on board, but once you get VC financing, then you're going to have a board that's mainly, venture funded people. The board, I thought I was careful in choosing my board members and my investors who had operating experience, but I think yes, they can give you connections and things like that, but that's it. I mean, just don't I think there is like a lot of overemphasis on what board members can do, but it depends on what role. I mean, if it's going to be venture-backed company and they're sitting there to see, what progress you make, they might give you introductions, but I didn't get much. I did and did not. If anybody is my board member here, I shouldn't. So I think it's good, but it's mainly you're getting a lot of feedback from your customers and your people who have the knowledge in the market. So it's
Cool, thank you. So finally, I think we're getting to the last question. How does being a woman impact or change any of this? And I was going to start with this question because I'm a firm believer that these recipes are common for everyone. Having a woman, being a woman or a man, it doesn't matter. And then I talked to my CEO again, and he said, absolutely not. You have to end with that question, and you have to ask each of your panelists to talk about it, because being a woman has a huge advantage because you have a greater sense of intuition, and doing the right thing kind of occurs to you naturally. Maybe I'll take that compliment. I told him thank you. I'll take that compliment, but I've never felt that way, but would love to hear your thoughts on it. Dharti?
Yeah, I celebrate being a woman every day. So for me, I really don't find much of a difference in the world of business, to be very honest. Yes, there are times when you walk into a meeting and you have somebody junior and there are men sitting in the boardroom, they'd rather talk to him because it's a man. But I think it's just about connecting. Once you are able to establish some kind of conviction and leadership, I think that everything falls to the wayside, and then eventually I think we can just take over. I just love being a woman in power.
Yeah, in our case, I mean, usually it is true what you were saying. When it comes to funding, like less than 8% of funding goes to the women for late stage funding in 2017. There are all statistics behind it. But what really worked is, as I started it with, is identifying a big market where there's a real need and customers willing to pay. And second thing is there's no shortcut to execution. I found again and again, like, once you had the numbers and you could show that you had the product market fit, which is shown by numbers, it was very easy for us to move from stage A to stage B very fluidly. So those were the two things that really worked for me. Apart from that, I 100% agree with you. Intuition is something which is an advantage to be used for.
And you're absolutely right. Data can never lie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to broaden it beyond being a woman. It's about being a person of color. It's about having international roots. It's about embracing diversity. And I think what happens is when you have diversity on the leadership team, diversity begets diversity, because you end up attracting people of very diverse backgrounds. And diversity is great, not just because, it feels good, but it's also the smart thing to do, right? Like there's a lot of research that proves that when you have diversity on a team and diversity of thinking and approaches, you actually end up with better results. Teams that are very homogenous just don't do as well. And there's volumes of research that show that. So I think just embracing who you are and what you bring to the table, and also surrounding yourself by other people who also bring in other elements of diversity is really good.
I think all of you have added great points to this. So one thing I wanted to mention is that there's a lot of qualities in women. I love working with women, the whole loyalty piece, and I love mentoring women. It's just great. I mean, I do like the passion that they bring. But at the same time, if you look at the statistics, there's something like less than 5% of the women who become venture-backed company actually go through the exit. There is a lot of changes that happen, and I've been passionate about why is that. I mean, I've had my journey through 14 years running the company, being venture-backed, and kind of constant doubt of whether you can do the job. I mean, and I realized through that, what is that I'm doing differently than my male partners who were good friends, and I'm in a CEO forum with 18 men and me, one woman, but it's actually, I just realized that women have to know a lot more about the subject before they can actually say, yes, I will go do this. And entrepreneurship is all about unknown, and you need to be completely comfortable to go and do something when it's unknown. And they've actually done, this is not my data, statistically, men have to know something like 15% of the information, and they can say, yes, I'll go get it done, and women have to know more than 60% to even say, I'll attempt to do it. Mm-hmm. So this is something to be aware of, to say, it's okay. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to take the risk, and people will understand. And to your point of, you had some challenges early on with the customer. It's 16 months later. It's okay. They're still surviving, and I've had some issues too. But people want to know that you took that, but you corrected it. You're doing something about it. So being an entrepreneur is about, yes, it's risk-taking, but even beyond that, there is a difference in how we handle it. So being cognizant and making sure that you can actually give the confidence that you can get the job done, even though, sometimes you have to pivot, sometimes you don't know. Nobody's got a crystal ball, but it's all about projecting that confidence to investors, customers, employees becomes a very important aspect. So there's a lot of positives, and then we need to look at what are the things that we can improve on, and that is something, I wanted to share.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Very inspiring. I feel inspired and humbled by all of you. Thank you. And Karpagam, thank you so much. Look at the room.